Hi, so my name's Jez Smith. I work for Discovery Schools Trust. I've been teaching for over 20 years and I've been in this role for the last 5, working across schools to support them in developing English, both reading, writing, grammar, oracy and phonics. Maddie?
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a Year 6 teacher at Fossebrook Primary School in Leicester Forest East, and I've been English lead there for the past 4 years. I'm also an English SLE, so that means I go to lots of different schools and help provide support as well in running some of the network meetings for Discovery Schools alongside Jez as well.
So I'll share the screen. Maddie's going to keep an eye on the chat bar. As I said, if you've got any questions as we go along or anything you want to suggest, please by all means be involved. So Maddie and I, we're going to talk about teaching guided reading effectively online. And a lot of the principles that we do in class are exactly the same pedagogy that we'd want to see in our remote teaching. So the aims of today's session are to suggest some strategies that support you in the teaching of reading fluency. And this is one of the areas that research has shown that through remote learning, we often neglect. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you could do with regards to that.
We're also going to be sharing tips from experts and teachers about reading remotely. So we'll be looking at the experts and the research that's been done, as well as speaking from teachers across Discovery Schools Trust and finding out what they found that has worked best for them.
We're going to explore a model lesson. It's a pre-recorded session that Maddie did, and I just want you to reflect on that and look at some of the good things that she does within that lesson.
And then investigating ways for children to record learning visual formats. So Jez has come up with some fantastic ideas to show, to visually show the compare and contrast books and things like that.
And finally, we just want to provide some useful online resources and apps that many of you will be familiar with. Some of you might need to be directed to those, but just share some of the things that we've found particularly useful in the schools that we've been in. I'm just going to stop the recording. I'm not going to stop the recording. I'm going to stop sharing only because I don't think I've put the sound on. So I just want to check I've put the sound on.
Tick the box.
Ticked. There. So, looking at the research, Dr. Courtney Pep said that when reflecting upon the changing educational landscape that's taking place during remote learning, there are many challenges and dilemmas that are facing educators. However, we are very fortunate. Oh, I've lost my presentation again. We're very fortunate that educators, that's you, that's me, that's the people we work with in schools, have been creative, dynamic and very resourceful as professionals. And what we've done is we've turned the challenges that we've come across into opportunities for developing our own professional teaching. Again, Maddie Loxley said that educators are suddenly in uncharted waters. Without daily access to their students in the classroom, they've been left to improvise with untried tech tools, many of which they were designed to be supplemental rather than fundamental to teaching literacy. However, she also adds that when remote learning muddies the already complicated process of learning to read, teachers get creative and they find solutions. And what I hope that you gain from this presentation is some creative ways that we can use technology to enhance our teaching of reading and find some of the solutions to the obstacles that we might come across. So the Education Endowment Foundation obviously puts a lot of information out there, and they reviewed remote learning last year. And what they said is that the teaching quality is far more important than how lessons are delivered. Now we know there's real-time synchronous teaching, there's the alternative pre-recorded asynchronous teaching. And there was no real evidence about which one was better over another, although from our own experiences, we found some things enable things to happen more effectively. But what they did say was the most effective part of remote teaching was that the explanations were very clear, there was scaffolding throughout the learning process, and there was elements of feedback during the session and after the session.
So thinking about this then, we were looking at how we can teach. I've obviously, as a Year 6 teacher, I've taught guided reading remotely for 8 weeks or so when we were through the lockdown. And thinking about reading, this is something that we need when we're teaching reading in school, but also online, is thinking about giving children context to the text. So if we're looking at the reading rope, which is kind of replaced in some sense the simple view of reading, it shows that language comprehension and word recognition are the main things that go together to aid comprehension, to aid reading. So, and one of the key things for that was background information, and children needing to know key facts or concepts in order for them to really be able to comprehend and understand the text fully. So thinking about this, we were looking at understanding the world. And in some texts, there are fundamental knowledge that is absolutely key to understanding the story. So this is a book once that I've taught in Year 6, which if you've studied a World War II topic, this text is absolutely brilliant. But in this book, it's about this young boy, Felix, who is a young Jewish boy in a Polish orphanage, and he's pretending to be Catholic, and he doesn't know what is going on and how the Jews are being persecuted across Poland and Germany. Now, throughout this text, Felix doesn't know what's going on, and it's kind of his journey until he realizes that what is happening. But the children need to have so much fundamental knowledge before they can understand that text fully. They need to know about Nazi Germany. They need to know about World War II. They need to understand the persecution of the Jews in order to understand that text. And there's lots of different ways we can use this, and thinking about doing this in a remote setting as well. So looking at non-fiction text, when I taught the Oliver Twist book, we don't study the Victorians, but I showed the children a non-fiction text linked to the Victorians and linked to the workhouses. So they had that fundamental knowledge by the time when we read that text. Also, The Road to Freedom is about slavery and the Underground Railroad. And I showed the children a video of Harriet Tubman explaining what the Underground Railroad was. Then also just giving key slides with key facts on. So this slide here links to the model lesson that you're going to see in a bit, which is about the wreckers and what they did. So finding fluency, and as Jez said, fluency is a thing that kind of gets left out when we're looking at teaching reading in a remote context. And fluency is the critical bridge between word recognition and comprehension. It links, when we think about reading, we often think about it as being able to read the words and being able to comprehend, but fluency is the thing that links those two together. And if we look at it in the national curriculum, we can see that the programme of study for Year 1 and 2 specifically mentions word reading and fluency, and you can see the length of the word reading and fluency, the length of the word reading statutory requirements there, and it specifically mentions reading fluency. But by the time we get to Year 3, it assumes that most children can read fluently, when actually this probably isn't really the case. So looking at what fluency is, it is automaticity. So being able to read the words automatically and smooth, recognising those words. So it minimises their cognitive energy and also allows the focus to be on comprehension rather than the decoding. But also prosody, which is reading with expression and rhythm, and looking at the intonation and the tone and reading to the punctuation. And the appropriate rhythm and phrasing shows that meaning of the text. And it's not just reading quickly. A lot of people think that reading fluently just means reading a text quickly, but it's not. It's using that automaticity and the prosody as well. So, reading fluency. Fluency is the ability to read with expression, automatic word recognition, rhythm and phrasing, and smoothness. And we can use the acronym for this, EARS. So the E stands for expression, like we said, prosody, expression to reflect and expand on the meaning, using their intonation and the fluctuation in the tone of voice, and the tone reading to show the emotions. And then A is reading, or I'm going to say automatically instead, reading automatically, being able to recognise and decode those words automatically. Reading with pace, so the speed in which they move through the text, and then the words per minute. So the DFE says that in Year 2, their recommended was 90 words per minute. But actually, if I'm looking at the Year 6 SATS paper, it was something more like 120 words per minute that the children need to be able to read in order to get through the text within an hour. And then there are the rhythm and phrasing, reading in chunks, reading in meaningful chunks, so scooping the phrases. Instead of reading the individual words, can they read looking at the phrasing and the chunking and reading to the punctuation? again, pausing, using that punctuation as a guide. When they get to a comma, do they do a small pause? When they get to a punctuation, a longer pause. And then the F, the smoothness, the accuracy in the reading and decoding the words with precision, but also being able to self-correct and recognise and correct their own errors when they are reading. So there's lots of different ways to build fluency. Now, when I teach guided reading, we do it in a whole class structure. We teach whole class guided reading, and we read the same text for a week. We read it in lots of different ways. We read, and reread the same text. And throughout the week, the children read the same text in order to achieve fluency. And we use different strategies throughout the week in order to achieve this. One of the strategies, one of the key things I found that really helps is pre-teaching key vocabulary. So at the beginning of each session, I will practice a set of key words that the children might not have heard of before or might not be able to work out from or understand from the context of the meaning in the sentence. And also the common exception words. The reading scheme that we use, Active Learn Book Club, is fantastic because it puts in lots of the common exception words. So I'll pre-teach them at the beginning of each session. But also modelling fluent reading regularly. It's really important that adults read to children so that children can hear the fluent reading and children have the opportunities to follow along. So on the first day of my guided reading cycle, I will read the text to the children so they can hear how to read the text fluently, how it's modelled to them how to read that text. And then the second day, we do the fill the gap reading. So this is where the adult reads the text fluently and the children follow along and fill the gaps. So the first day, they've read, I've just read it to them, they've followed along. This is now moving on to the next stage. We will read the text again, but I will leave gaps. And when I pause, the children will fill the gaps. And here's an example of this being done through a remote learning setting through Teams.
Sam, Evie and I, all my sisters, but there was no sign of her. It wasn't until my eyes landed on the cat theme party on the dining room table that it hit me. Anthony's cake! I said, running towards the... She must have gone down to get it. Angeli! I cried when we got halfway down the stairs. There, standing on a chair in front of the fridge, was my little sister. She was holding the plate with her cat cake on it, and all around her was... murky brown water. It reached almost to the top of the chair legs. Stay there! I'm coming to get you! I said, but Sam held me back. Wait, it might be dangerous. He motioned to the socket where the fridge was plugged in. Sam was right. Electricity and water didn't mix.
So thinking about that then, one of the problems with this, and also with choral reading as well. So choral reading was when the children read the text all together. So everybody's reading at the same time. Now the tricky part with this in a remote learning setting is thinking about the Wi-Fi connectivity. So in the clip you just saw, obviously I was in school and most of the children were at home. So thinking about the speed in which I am reaching them and the sound is coming out, it was a bit jolty at times, and choral reading in particular, where everybody's reading all together, did not work. So we didn't use this strategy when I was teaching through a remote setting. Okay, another one is echo reading. So this is where adults model reading a section and the children then repeat, thinking about that prosody, thinking about that reading automatically, but also thinking about the tone and intonation.
Loud to everybody.
Okay. My sister nodded, but then as far as she was concerned, the real tester shook.
Fab, thank you, Gabrish. I can see that you could read all the words in that text, but have a look. Thinking about the punctuation, can you see after my sister nodded, there is a comma to show that there should be a pause, and then we've got some brackets, and we know that brackets are for parenthesis, so it's kind of like an added extra thought. And then if we look at this word real, can you see that real is written in italics? Does anybody know why real is written in italics? Oh, see, some people put their hand up. Right, I'm going to spotlight you. I'm going to spotlight people. Oh, I'm going to spotlight you. Pupil 1. 2, answer that question. Why is that word written in italics?
It is written in italics, so you know when to emphasize a word.
Oh, perfect. It's written in italics, so we know that we need to emphasize that word. So if we were reading this then, we would read it like this. So my sister nodded, but then, as far as she was concerned, the real disaster struck. And can you hear how when I read that again, I paused after my sister nodded because there was the comma. When I read the parenthesis, I chose the way I read it. And then the real, I really emphasised it. So my sister nodded, but then, as far as she was concerned, the real disaster struck. Gabrish, can you have a go at reading that sentence again? Thinking about emphasis, thinking about putting emphasis on that word real and pausing where there's a comma.
My sister nodded, but then, as far as she was concerned, the real disaster struck.
That was much better. Well done. Thank you very much. Okay, shall we have a look at another?
So you can see there that when Gabrish read that back, when we talked about pausing at the comma, looking at the punctuation, he read it that time with more fluently, as he did use the punctuation and change his tone of voice as he read it. Another strategy for building fluency is paired reading. So thinking about the idea of scooping the phrases and reading to the punctuation, it's a really good idea to get the children to read in pairs, but they change every time there is a piece of punctuation. So here is an example of this done in a remote learning environment with these two children where they are paired reading the same text to the punctuation.
I'm shaking again, but I'm a practical guy. I don't waste a lot of time wondering how I got into Simon's skinny body. All elbows and knees, and barely a muscle to be seen. Hold on, bruv. I'm coming up, I say. Even my voice is different. It comes out higher than I expect. I grip the wall. Don't look down. Breathe. Focus on the next hold. The next move. These are the things I whisper to myself every time I climb. Now I have arms the size of licorice bootlaces. I'm twice as sweaty. What's going on? Simon in my own body hisses when I reach him. You'd think he'd be happier.
So again, you can hear there how when they're reading to the punctuation, it's kind of low threat as well because they're not having to read big chunks to their partners. And I know when people I've done paired reading before, I've got them to read paragraph by paragraph or page by page, but actually reading to the punctuation works really well because they are having to scoop up those phrases. And also it's quite low threat as well. So they're not having to read massive chunks of text in one go. And they're having to follow along and follow each other at the same time. So some ways of encouraging engagement when used teaching remotely. So I found together mode works really well because everybody can see each other at the same time, and it also does make it look like you are sat in a classroom. Or we can have other scenes as well. So this was kind of like a lecture theatre. We've kind of got one that looks like a classroom, and then one that looks like a cinema, but like a cinema room there. And then under the sea as well. And it did make me laugh when I watched the video back where I was using this. I was like, oh, we look very a fish as we are under the sea. But with this one, just beware because some of the layouts have a limited number of people. So this only had 9 people or 10 people that you could see at one time. And obviously I have a class full of 30 pupils. It's nice if they can see everybody all in one go. And then all the pupils on the screen at the same time, so it's nice because I can see everybody, and they got really good as well at setting it themselves so that they could all see each other and then blurring their backgrounds or changing their backgrounds as well. And then the cold calling and spotlighting I found worked really well, and you might have noticed in the video where I was talking to Gabrish about reading to the punctuation and thinking about the italics, spotlighting children so that it's just them on screen when they are answering questions. And they're ever so funny. They try and put their physically put their hand up like they would in an actual lesson. So we can use the hands up function, but also cold calling them so that, a bit like in the lesson, if you have a no hands up policy, it's very similar to that. So here's a video of just so you can see it again, just using the spotlighting.
9. What did the main character do with those decorations?
She dumped them out.
Perfect. She dumped them into the murky brown water. Well done. Thank you very much.
And again, it's just them making sure that the children know how to unmute themselves in that moment and when to mute and unmute themselves when they are answering questions. And then I find the chat feature has been really useful as well, because I've used the chat feature. I've counted down, say I've asked a question and then asked everybody to type the answer in the chat bar using 3, 2, 1 and everybody send at the same time. But if I just want to find something out and gauge how they're feeling or know what they're going to write about, so this where I put first class and third class, we were doing a description in English of the Titanic. So we looked at what the first class area would look like compared to the third class area. And I just wanted to know who was writing their description on which bit. So instead of getting them to type first class or third class and having 30 different responses, I just asked them to like which one they were doing. And also for your AFL, posting an emoji, you know, how are you feeling about the learning? And obviously if they've put a sad face or they're not very happy or a thumbs down, then we know that then I'd ask them to stay on and I'll go through another one. If they're happy, I'd say, right, you can leave the meeting and get on with your learning.
So before we look at some of the top tips from the experts, I just think it's really important for us to just stop and just reflect on what Maddie said. As I've said, the research is showing that we do a really good job of teaching decoding through the use of IT. We do a great job of exploring comprehension questions, but what we often ignore is getting children to practice their reading fluency. And I hope that some of the strategies that Maddie showed with the echo reading and the paired reading and such like just give you some ideas for how we can continue to encourage children to develop their reading fluency. And the other thing is just about people engagement. Obviously, children like to see themselves, they like to see each other, and Teams is great for that. I know Google Classroom does very similar functions, and it's just making sure that we're aware of those different ways that we can get children to be seen on screen so they feel part of the learning. So as I've said, if you've got any comments or questions you want to ask about reading fluency or pupil engagement, drop them into the chat bar and Maddie will read those out. But I just want to talk to you a little bit about some work that Alex Quigley did last year. We know that Alex Quigley does a lot of writing for the Education Endowment Foundation, and he wanted to share some of the advice that Professor Kirshner had put together for the work for Research Ed. And Professor Kirshner put together his top 10 tips for remote learning. Lots of them echo or mirror the work of Barrett Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction. So if you're familiar with those, they match very closely to those, but are obviously more focused on remote learning. So the first one was stick to the essentials. Add to previous subject matter. Second one is about spread the learning in practice, use short sessions. And I think most of the recorded sessions that teachers are doing are at the most 15 minutes, most of them around 10 to 12 minutes long. Making sure there's that clarity again of communicating the goals and the success criteria. What are we expecting our children to achieve by the end of the session? Then there's framing the new material within the bigger picture. As Maddie said, making sure we've not ignored the context. If there's any language that they need before they start the text, if there's any historical context or understanding of the topic before they engage with the text, that's done prior to the learning. And things like OneNote are great for uploading videos so the children can watch videos beforehand. And then as we go along, just making sure we're relating the learning to previous learning, to the children's own experiences. As Maddie said, you know, we keep repeating the same text so the children get really familiar with the context of the text and just reviewing the learning as we go along. Kirshner also said that we needed to use any prior knowledge and just hook it into what they've done before to anchor it in a firm place with what they've gained through previous learning in school or in previous year groups, and just ensuring that there's scaffolds there to support them as well.
Sorry, Jez, we just had a question. Somebody just asked, when the children were using doing the partner reading, was that in a breakout room? Yes, it was in a breakout room. So when I did the meetings, I just used the same link for every single meeting, and I set the breakout rooms up in the first meeting, and then they were automatically set then to the breakout rooms. So then whenever we did the partnered reading, we could then automatically just put them into the breakout rooms when they needed it. Sorry, going back to this, so top tips on the expert, give examples before the exercises. So actually explicitly modelling the actual learning and talking through using the teacher talk. So we use the I do, we do, you do model. So I explicitly model it, we do one together, and then the children then have a go by themselves, but also using that AFL and using things like the chat feature to gauge where children are and how confident they're feeling. And then if they're not feeling confident, we can go through another one together. Offering support and guidance during practice. So again, making yourself available if possible. We have a help desk function where the children can ask questions. So once they've gone off and I stay on and they can come back on, but also they can ask questions through the help desk, which also is fantastic because all the other children have access to that. So they help each other at the same time as well. And there's a girl in my class who basically answered all the questions before I could even get there, which was fantastic. So support and stimulate that active processes, so providing opportunities for people to further elaborate and expand on their learning, so giving challenge as well. Then let the students check for mastery, so using that regular retrieval practice. So we do retrieval practice and like Jez said, recapping that prior learning regularly, but also providing feedback, share with them what they're doing well and what they could do even better and how they could do it even better. So when we were teaching in the remote learning context, at the beginning of every session, we would provide the feedback through the assignments, but also we'd do a general whole class feedback. If there were key themes, there was a key question that the children had struggled with, say with inference or whatever, we'd then I'd model that question for them the next day.
So if you're interested in Professor Kirshner's top 10 tips, if you go to the link that's on the screen there, you'll be able to watch his video and his presentation with regards to that. So we're going to look at a model lesson now. So this is a year 6 lesson. It's pre-recorded using PowerPoint. It's a guided reading session that is focusing on vocabulary. And as you watch the video, we're not going to have time for breakout rooms, but I just want you to just reflect on the way that Maddie delivers her lesson. I want you to think about what are the things that she does that you like? What are the things that you think are very positive, not only for a remote learning context, but also for developing reading? I want you to think about, in your school context, is there anything that you would change based on the resources that you've got? And again, if you've got any interesting questions about what Maddie does, put those in the chat bar. The video is about 7 minutes long. I'm just going to play the whole session, and you'll see the structure that she has. As she said, they use a I do, we do, you do structure. And then I'll just talk about some of the things that I think from a lead professional point of view that she's done particularly successfully and works really well in this way of pre-recording a reading session.
It's probably worth mentioning as well that when we teach guided reading, we teach the individual content domains separately. So we'll have a day where we introduce the text. We'll have a day where we focus on retrieval, a day where we focus on vocabulary, a day where we focus on inference, and then also prediction or summary, depending on where we're at. So this was the vocabulary day. Good afternoon, Year 6. Welcome to today's guided reading session where we're going to be focusing on word meaning. So before we start today's session, please can you make sure you've downloaded and read through the text, the Red Lady Part 1, because there are no slides on here where we go through and read it again. So please make sure you've read it beforehand. Also, please make sure you have your pen and paper ready. And please, like we've said before, please make sure you're present, you are listening, and you are making notes, and you are ready to answer some questions. So, okay, so this was just the plan for the week. We've already introduced the text, we've had a read through it together, and then today we're focusing on the word meaning. And tomorrow we'll look at retrieval, then we'll look at inference, and then we're going to do a prediction based on what we think might happen next. So, very quickly before we begin, can you have a think back to these words that were from the challenge yesterday and are from the text? What did these words mean? So we've got wreckers, vessel, gallows. And can you have a go at putting them in sentences of your own? So pause the video now and have a think, what do these words mean? Okay, so let's have a look then at what these words mean. So if you remember from yesterday, the wreckers were the people who would indicate to the ship that it was safe by using the lanterns, but actually it wasn't. So then the ship would crash, the ship we would call the shipwreck, which would then wash up the cargo onto the beach, and the wreckers would take it, would basically steal it and sell it on. A vessel is basically a synonym for ship, and then the gallows, these were these, so criminals in those days would be sent to the gallows, and that means they would be hanged. So the rope would be placed around their neck, and they would be dropped, and it would strangle them to death. And then it talks in this text about the fact that the wreckers get sent to the gallows. So the wreckers get hanged because the survivor, I think it was called John, told the Coast Guard that the wreckers had stolen the cargo, and then the wreckers were caught and sent to the gallows. Okay, so today, like I said, we're looking at word meaning, and this means to give or explain the meaning of words in context. And there's some key vocabulary that we need to know in order to answer some of these questions. So a very quick reminder, a synonym is a word that means the same. So like I just said, ship and vessel are synonyms. An antonym are words that are the opposite. So for example, happy and sad are antonyms. And then a phrase is a group of words. Okay, then, so now it's my turn to have a go at a word meaning question. Because if you remember, the orange circle indicates my turn, the yellow one, our turn, and the green one is your turn to have a go. So my question says, look at page 10 at the paragraph starting, a gale was blowing. Find and copy one word that is a synonym for hoping. Okay, so I know I need to be looking at page 10. And I'm looking for the paragraph starting, a gale was blowing. Now let me have a look. Here we go, a gale was blowing. And I'm looking at this paragraph. I need to find and copy one word that is a synonym for hoping. Now, if you remember, a synonym is a word that means the same. So I'm looking for a word that means the same as hoping. So hoping, obviously, you're wanting something to happen. So let me have a read through. I'm going to skim through and have a look. A gale was blowing and there was no moon, just the sort of night the records have been hoping for. Well, there's the word hoping. I know it's not that. I'm looking for a word that means the same as that. The Black Rose would be struggling in the wind. The captain was not quite sure of his position and eager to find shelter from the storm. Okay, so if I'm having a look at this, I know that the word eager, if you're eager for something to happen, you want something to happen. So if I replace that word eager with hoping, does it fit? So let me have a read. The captain, not quite sure of his position and hoping to find shelter from the storm. Does that work? It does. So I know that the synonym for hoping is eager. Okay, let's have a look at one together then. So it was a dark and stormy night and the wind was strong, began Grandpa. Cal and I looked at each other. A gale was blowing and there was no moon. And it says, circle the two words above that are synonyms. So if you remember, synonyms are words that mean the same. And we're looking for two words that mean the same. So can you pause the video now and see if you can find those two words that mean the same? Okay, let's have a look together then. So it was a dark and stormy night and the wind was strong, began Grandpa. Cal and I looked at each other. A gale was blowing and there was no moon. Okay, so I can see the two words that mean the same are wind and gale. And I know this because if I replace this word wind with gale, does it make sense? It was a dark and stormy night and the gale was strong. Yes, it does. And what about this one? If I replace it with wind, does it make sense? A wind was blowing and there was no moon. Yes, so I know that these words are synonyms. They mean the same. Okay, so now it is your turn. You have got 5 word meaning questions to have a go at. So number 1, look at page 10. You need to look for the paragraph and you're looking for synonyms again. Now, and the second one, you're looking at what does the word peculiar mean. I've put it in the sentence here for you. Number 3, you're looking for an antonym. So if you remember, an antonym is a word that is the opposite. Then we've got this one here. We've got we scrambled down the rocks. What does the word scramble tell you? So do you think it was easy or do you think it was difficult? And then finally, look at page 13 at the final paragraph. finally copy the phrase. So here you're looking for a group of words. So a group of words. And then the challenge. Here you've got, for the challenge, you've got the word gargantuan in the middle. And can you write down as many words as you can that are synonyms, so words that mean the same, for the word gargantuan? And then you've got an extra challenge on top of that. Can you put those words into an order? So any order, and can you explain why you've put them in that order? Okay, so I have, for the guiding reading for today on Teams, I have put the pictures of the 2 activities for you to do. Please make sure you have also downloaded the text ready so you can have a look at that at the same time. And then please make sure you're uploading your work to assignment so that I can have a look at it and we can go through anything we were unsure of, ready for tomorrow. Right, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing your work and I'll see you later. Bye.
So I hope you saw lots of good practice there. I think it was a great lesson. I think there was lots of things, both from a reading point of view, but also from a remote learning point of view, that I was really impressed with. So I'm going to go through some of the things that I think are worth bearing in mind when we teach reading remotely. If you've got any questions for your P.M.I that you want to ask Maddie or myself, please put those in the chat bar as I go along. So the first thing that I really liked, that there was a really clear and simple structure to the session. As Maddie says, all of the sessions that they teach try to follow that I do, we do, you do. So there's that modelled expectation there, it's explicitly and directly modelled by the teacher. Then there's that collaborative or shared exploration of a question, and then there's the independent work that follows. And all of the sessions that Maddie and the staff do at Fossebrook are between 8 and 15 minutes long. She's really clear about her expectations. She shared those at the outset with the pupils, talking about making sure they'd pre-read the text and what equipment they would need and the types of learning behaviours that they'd need to be demonstrating as they watched the session. She was very natural. It comes across almost as if she was in the room with the children. She shares where the learning fits in. She talks about where it fits in the sequence of sessions and what went before and what's coming in the days that follow. And again, she recaps initially on the prior learning, looking at the new vocab and the 3 terms that the children need to remember as they engaged and interacted with the text again. I like the way that she uses the pause symbol. Not only that does indicate to herself, but also indicates to the pupil that this is a place where if they're playing the video back in their own time, they need to stop, do some thinking, maybe go back to the text, maybe discuss it with another adult or write something down. Throughout, there's lots of helpful images, and I think this is something that we do really well in Key Stage 1 and Foundation Stage, but it's just as crucial in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. It's useful to just remind and prompt and give it just more of a contextual element to the learning. She uses age-appropriate language throughout. I like the fact she explained the key terms. She knew that within some of the questions, the word synonyms, antonyms and phrase would come up. So she explained those before the children were left to independently have a go at the questions that she'd set. As we said before, the I do, we do, you do structure was there. It was her turn, then it was our turn together, and then it was your turn. And again, you may or may not have noticed that Maddie also uses a traffic light system to indicate to the pupils, this bit is where I'm going to demonstrate it to you. This is the bit where I'd like you to think about how we would do that collaboratively. And this is the bit where you will do the questions independently. And again, she used some digital linking. She showed, she highlighted certain parts of the text, but also demonstrated where and how to write responses. As Maddie said, she talks through the thinking process. So just as the children will be going through a thought process and trialing and error with certain things, she demonstrates that. She directly models the actual learning. She shows them what she wants them to be able to do when they do their independent work. She clearly explained and shared the task at the end. She provided an extension or a challenge for them to go on to. And she also shared where she wanted them to not only find the resource, but also where to upload the completed assignment. Maddie, were there any questions?
No questions so far.
Okay, so I hope you can see that through that session, which I think has done a great job of both teaching reading, but also making the most of a remote learning situation. You can see some of the good practice that is probably going on in most of our schools anyway, but we just need to be really aware of whenever we're teaching in that way. So I just want to talk to you very briefly about visual learning tools. So one of the things that the research with regards to remote learning has talked about is that we often can fall into the trap of children just recording their answers in a linear format and just writing responses, whereas we need to be a little bit more creative and give them ways of recording those in a more visual way. And again, tools like OneNote are brilliant for just being able to upload a frame where the children can type their work into. So visual learning tools, or sometimes called graphical organisers, provide us with a framework to structure and organise our learning. It really helps pupils to just focus on the key concepts or ideas of the reading at that time. It allows us, but also the pupils, to be able to see any connections between their thinking. And again, linked to that is the whole idea of we can see the relationships between the different pieces of information that we're engaging with. So I just want to share 3 or 4 visual learning tools. The first one's called a story flower, which I've been using for years and years, and it's something that looks very Key Stage 1E, but there's no reason why this can't be used in years 4, 5 and 6, and even Key Stage 3. And once you've looked at a piece of text, obviously a narrative piece of text, you simply need to record the who, the characters in the text, the key events or actions that take place, the setting where the story takes place, the time of day or the year or the season. Why does the character, or why do the characters get into a problem? What is the difficulty they're facing? And how do they get out of that problem? What is the solution they do? So I'll just share some examples. Oh, I won't share examples. I'll go into double bubble maps. So double bubble maps is another great one. This is a way of comparing and contrasting different ideas. So here there was an FS2 child who looked at with a TA in a small group, a non-fiction text that looked at insects, and they looked at the ant and they looked at a bee, and then together they discussed how the bee and the ant were similar and different. So if you look down the center, you can see that both the ant and the bee have a queen, they're both insects and they're both very tiny. But if you look at the ant information, the ant crawls, it lives in a hill and it digs tunnels, whereas the bee flies, lives in a hive and makes honey. Again, you can see another example here. This wasn't necessarily reading an example. This is where they compared a mud kitchen to the home corner. Here is a story flower out of sequence, but yeah, here's a story flower completed by a Year 1 child. They were reading the book Dipper in Danger, and you can see they've recorded who were the characters in the text, what happened to Dipper, where did the story take place, when did the story take place, why did Dipper get into a problematic situation, and how did Dipper get out of that difficult situation. So I'll just leave that there for a moment while you just have a look at how it's organised. Another useful thing is to sometimes flip it around, and when the children have read a text, get them to come up with questions of their own that they'd like to ask of that text. So you can see here a Year 2 child has had a go at creating their own questions for each of the question stems. Again, here's a story flower for Year 5. This is for chapter 14 of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And again, this Year 5 pupil, once they've read that chapter, has done a retrieval exercise and summarised the learning of that chapter by recording the who, what, where, the when, why, and how. Back to our double bubble maps. Forgive me for having them out of sequence. But here you've got a Year 1 child who's been exploring as a group. I think this was a group discussion, both the story Red Riding Hood and Goldilocks. And then they talked about this together, and then one of the pupils wrote up for the group, again, how Goldilocks and Red Riding Hood were very similar, but also how they were discrete and different to one another. This is the Year 5 version where they read and explored over the week 2 versions of the same legend. And then again, they looked for the similarities between the 2 versions and the things that were discrete. And here, this was a non-fiction text type that was explored in a guided reading setting, and the Year 6 pupil compared in a non-chron report the ancient Olympics with modern Olympics, and looked at, again, down the centre, those things that they had in common, and then around the outside, those things that were discrete to those different times in history. So that's both of those are really fantastic ways of recording visually the learning. These are concept maps. Again, you may have used these in science, but there's no reason why it can't be used in a reading context. So a Year 4 child here read as a class the water cycle, and then the keywords that were given by the teacher, they had to find connections. So the connections between rain and mountains, the connections between condensing and vapor, between clouds and the sun, and they just had to connect those words with the learning that they'd acquired from their reading. Again, a concept mapped here. Again, I think this was done with a Year 1 pupil with some adult online support, where they read the book Rainbows and connected these words. Year 6 here, they were reading explanation text. And again, you can see they were given some keywords, and then they had to look at how those words were connected to create the concept map. And finally, not so easy to do, but you can also do it with a fiction text. So here, a more able Year 2 child read The Samosa Thief, and again connected the names, places, and the objects within the text with the information they gained from their reading. So let's look at some useful online apps. There's 4 that we're going to look at. The first one's Immersive Reader. The second one is Google Jamboard, and Teams has its own version of a whiteboard. We're going to look very briefly at Flipgrid, and then look at how Microsoft Forms can be used within Teams. So Maddie.
So Immersive Reader allows the children to change the font size and the spacing in the background or the colour. So thinking about those children who might have dyslexic tendencies and like to have a coloured background, there's the option there to change the different backgrounds, but also to change the sizing of the letters and the fonts as well. There's also an option to have the text read aloud and change the speed at which the text can be read. So you can see at the bottom there's a play button and it will read the text out loud. It also, thinking about the grammar, it also highlights, there's an option to highlight any verbs, noun, adverbs or adjectives, and also to break it down into syllables. And it's also fantastic to translate into other languages as well. So I've got a boy in my class who is Polish, and he has his maths is fantastic, but he can't access the problem solving and reasoning. So we use Immersive Reader in order to help him access the problem solving and reasoning questions. I've had a question saying, is Immersive Reader free? If you use Microsoft Edge, it's on there. So if you have the newest version of Windows, I think it is free on there. This is used through OneNote. So if you have OneNote 10, that's how I used it on OneNote. But also, if you have Microsoft Edge, there is an option on there in the bar at the top where your web address goes. There's a little picture that looks a bit like a book. And if you click on that, it can translate web pages. It does all of this for web pages as well.
So the next one I want to look at very briefly is Jamboard. So this is a Google app, but it's an online app. It's really great. You can basically type, post and drag sticky notes anywhere on the screen. So you can set up headings and get the children then to just put sticky notes anywhere on the screen. It is anonymous sticky notes, so if you want to know who's posted what, you need to get them to put their initials. That you can then write and draw on there with a stylus. If you want, you can insert images or web pages, and you can have up to 50 people posting onto one board. So if you've not looked at that, if you just type Google Jamboard, you can see how you can set that up very easily. And there's also Padlet that does something very similar. You can see at the bottom there. But again, if you want to have a look at something where you can use sticky notes in a remote context, that's a great way of doing that. Flipgrid, I'll look at Flipgrid before I leave Maddie to look at forms. Flipgrid is great, and I know lots of schools are already using it. And it's almost a safe learning community where you can post videos and children can post videos, and you can set that. So you can set it anything from, I think, 30 seconds up to 10 minutes maximum, where the children can record a response or they can record themselves reading. post that, and then you and other pupils within that safe group are able to contribute to that. So I'm just going to share very briefly this video. I'm very mindful we're running out of time, so I think it's about 2 minutes. If I just play that before Maddie moves on to forms.
Welcome to Flipgrid, a video discussion experience from Microsoft. In this video, we'll provide everything you need to know to get started as a student. First, you'll need to access your class topic. Click the link or enter the code you received from your educator on the free Flipgrid app or on any computer with a webcam via the Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome browser at flipgrid.com. Log into Flipgrid using your school account by clicking the Microsoft or Google login. Read the topic discussion prompt. You can click this button to launch Microsoft's Immersive Reader, which provides powerful reading assistance. Watch the topic media, explore any links, and then, when you're ready, click to add a video. Flipgrid's camera is filled with powerful tools to help tell your story. You can add a filter, frame, text, emoji, ink, and draw on a board. You can upload images or even videos from your camera roll. Record, review, and re-record as many times as you would like. You can screen record and stitch together multiple clips. When you're ready, click Next, snap a selfie, and then click Submit. Watch videos from your peers here, add text or video comments, and review feedback from your educator.
So that's Flipgrid, and if you've not used Flipgrid, it's really worth looking. It's very easy to use. I know that Key Stage 1 teachers have used it, particularly in Year 1 and Year 2, to get children to record themselves reading a book for 2 or 3 minutes, and it just gives you a chance to hear them read when you're not in the same building.
Microsoft Forms. This is fantastic, especially thinking about guided reading, but also for your retrieval practice at the beginning of lessons. I know there's a Google version as well called Google Forms, and I've used it in a guided reading context to do quick fire retrieval questions. So you set your questions up, and it can be they can do multiple different responses. So it can be a tick the answer, select the correct answer. They have to physically write something in as well. The only thing to be careful of is if they have to write something in. So I asked a question, what 2 things do not mix? And it was water and electricity. But if they typed electricity and water, it said it was wrong. So that's just something to be aware of. It's also great. I know they've been using it today to conduct polls I've seen throughout the day and create surveys. And like I said, it's fab for retrieval tasks for guided reading, but also even in maths. We do some questions in maths at the beginning of the lessons, and it's great. So the children do the work on the piece of paper, but it just marks it automatically for you, so you don't have to go around and mark everybody's.
I know another app very similar that some schools have been using is Kahoot. So if you've got any other apps that you've used in school that have been really successful, again, drop it into the chat bar for us all to learn from. We're going to look at some websites now. So Oxford Owl is obviously one that lots of schools have been using. It's worth being aware that despite that last summer when we went into the first lockdown, all of their material was free. There are still free banded books, but it's only a sample of the books that they had before. Starfall's a useful one. It's one that's been around for a long time. It is an American website, but it does have some useful phonics books. So if you've got people in EYFS or Year 1 that want to have some phonics books, it's worth the teachers maybe having a look there and see if there's any that work particularly for the phonemes that they're learning at the time. Book Trust has had some great picture books being read by authors. Not only do you get to see and hear the author read, but also there's often associated activities that pupils can do as a follow-up. And linked to that, Storytime has a really useful channel on there where, again, there's other authors and other celebrities that are reading picture books. So all of those I would recommend for parents in your schools.
The YouTube channel is great as well, because we use accelerated reading in our school as well for independent reading. And there was a couple of children who didn't have any books of their own at home that were on accelerated reading. So I found a couple of channels where they were reading full novels. So there was the Diary of the Wimpy Kid books, the Alex Rider series. They were all being read out loud, and then the children would then go online, and also all of the Roald Dahl books were on there. They could then go online and do the quiz afterwards. And accelerated reading, if you've not used it, it's fantastic because it then tests their comprehension. Once they've read a story independently, it tests their comprehension of it. So another one is the Book Trust, and that has loads of rhymes and is mainly for EYFS children. Also Storytime Online, which has a number of picture books, and like Jez said, is read by actors, similar resource. And then Myon, which is linked to Accelerated Reader. This is a paid subscription though, but it does have over 7,000 books on there. And or like I said, Accelerated Reader, if you don't use it in your schools, is amazing, because the children read a book and then it has a quiz at the end that they then answer the questions on. And it also tells you how many words the children have read. So in my school, there's a massive competition to try and get to 1 million words. So they're trying to become word millionaires, and they absolutely love the competitive side of it as well. And then for Key Stage 3 or 4, there's something called Overdrives or Sora as well. And then Text Project, which is an American-based website, but it has some really good examples of PDF text. Somebody asked me a minute ago and said, for guided reading, do we use full novels or extracts? So what we do, we actually use something called Book Club Active Learn. So in my school, it is like a selection of short stories, poems, or non-fiction text, and it's fab because you might have seen in the videos where I was doing the fluency work, you can show them online as well. So you can show the text online, but we also get given the physical books. But I do know that thinking about using novels or extracts, I know of quite a lot of schools in the trust that follow the same model, where they read the same text all week and they use extracts. So they'll use an extract of a book or an extract of a class novel, and they will read that extract for the whole week and to build those reading fluency strategies. And then they will build in each of the content domain skills throughout the week. So the first day might be vocabulary, retrieval, inference, prediction, and then summary.
Yep. So again, if any of you've got any websites that you've come across that have been particularly useful for the teaching of reading, or any apps, again, just drop them in the chat bar and we can all take those away. So we're just going to end with some top tips from the real experts, from the teachers who work in our trust. We asked them, what were the things that they had learned from teaching remotely? What were some of the pieces of advice that they would like to pass on? So the first one was about building relationships, that it was key that you chatted to the children, not only within the session, but if you, before the session started, you could have just 2 or 3 minutes to connect with them. That was always helpful.
Also encouraging parents to listen, especially with the younger children, and trying to encourage them to support, but not necessarily take over, which I know is was a little bit tricky for some parents at times, to try and support and not answer the questions for them.
As I've said, things like Flipgrid are great because you can get a child to read to a parent, upload that video, and it just gives you a little bit of an assessment of the accuracy, the fluency, and the overall confidence that that pupil has of reading if they're not in school at that time.
Encouraging children to comment on books that they've read and enjoyed throughout the week. So getting them to take photos of themselves reading books. My children absolutely love doing this. When they've read a book, there's a group of them. We've got a thing in the classroom, and we put it on Teams as well, where they could post their favourite quote that they'd read that week. And then also that's great then, because it's encouraging, if the children see a quote that they like, it's encouraging them to read that book and sharing books and just having that general talk and that ethos of talking about books and reading for pleasure.
Have children respond in live lessons. So as Maddie said, she's shown different ways that children can take part. She talked about the gallery mode, she talked about the spotlight function, but again, making sure you're using the chat bar, not only to type in responses, but to use emojis as part of a way of engaging with the text.
Things also suggesting websites to parents and to the children, and think about recommended and the most appropriate text. So give them a choice of different websites to choose from. So thinking about accelerated reader, like I said, we gave our children some of the Oxford Owl books were on accelerated reader, but there was also things like looking at YouTube and using those as well.
So as Maddie does said before, making sure that you give children a chance to read the text before the session. So I know she always uploads the text and encourages them before the session to have read it through themselves before she reads it to or with them. And obviously, if they're able to print it off so that they can annotate it as they go along.
but also really modelling what you want the children to do and really explaining it, and more than once if they need it. So that's where using things like the emojis in the chat bar really, really helped, because it really helped me to gauge who had understood the learning and who wanted to go through it again. I mean, even the different ways of modelling. So it might be you have a worked example, so you've already had put it on the board, and then you're just explaining it to them, explaining each step, and then you might just do it and then and not say anything, and then do one where you talk through it. So even those different ways of modelling as well.
I think one of the points that came out earlier on is just making sure there's that regular practice, that even during live sessions, that you get children to write things down on pieces of paper or whiteboards, hold it up to the screen, or again, they type their responses in the chat bar. Even if, as Maddie did when she talked about the first class and the third class passengers on the Titanic, they just use an emoji.
I'm encouraging the children to record their responses to text in different ways. So looking at the graphical organisers, looking at responding to it through forms. So it's not all just written, answering questions, writing it down. They're answering them in different styles as well. Again,
the teachers talked about always getting the children to hear stories. So even when they're not doing a guided reading session, that you can direct them to specific stories. And I think that's important, not only to give them the websites that they can go to, but to say, look at this story, listen to the rainbow fish being read by this actor. And then it's something you can then discuss at another point.
But also be kind to yourself. Online lessons are likely to be clunky. Even you might have noticed when we were doing the spotlighting, it's not an automatic response like you get in the classroom. They don't always run smoothly as they do face-to-face. And they actually, in some cases, did take a little bit longer than normal, but that's okay. And it was all just a massive learning curve. So as you come to that, I just want to point out that whatever you use, whatever apps, whatever websites, whatever technology, whatever hardware or software you're using, you matter. And Daisy Christodoulou, she said that we will always need human teachers. But I think that use well technology can add value. If we want technology to improve education, we have to pay close attention to what it is that teachers actually do, and then work out ways that technology can support or improve that process. And she's done a really good piece of work on that, which you can go and read at that website. Not only that, but she's also brought out a new book. So she's brought out a book. It's called Teachers versus Tech, The Case for an EdTech Revolution, which is a fascinating read. At the heart of it is that teachers are still the most crucial and fundamental part of the learning process, but technology can just equip us with and enable us to do things that we maybe couldn't do before. And again, the TES has said that every educator should read this book, not just those involved in educational technology, every educator. So it's a book that comes highly recommended. So before we finish our session, we just ask if you don't mind filling out the Microsoft form, which is just an evaluation of this session, just to provide us and the trust with some feedback about what went well and what you think you might use in school, but also anything that we could improve on as well. So I've posted that, I think, into the chat. I have posted it into the chat. So if you don't mind just spending 5 minutes or so just filling that out, that would be really great. So stay with us because we will finish the session. But if you just want to use that time now so you don't have to do it at another point, if you can just click on complete that now. Some building work going on outside my house. Just mute myself for a minute. I've posted the wrong link. Oh no, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for pointing out. You're absolutely right. I have accidentally clicked on the wrong link. Hang on.
Have you got the link? Do you want me to post it?
No, I've got it now. Oh, it was just in this. Sorry, I'm so sorry. That's the one.
We'll give you another 3 or 4 minutes to complete that, and then we'll finish the session.
It was all running so smoothly.
Okay, so if I'll bring you back if you've finished. If you've not, if you just want to finish that off and then join the final part. I just want to just summarise everything that Maddie and I have learnt from the remote teaching and the remote learning that's been going on over the last year, and some of the points that we've addressed. A lot of the points, interestingly, correspond very closely to the Century Learning Framework, the 21st Century Learning Framework that you can read. So our first point is to connect and make sure that you connect with your pupils, that you can see each other at different points, whether you use the PowerPoint with the image in the corner like Maddie did with the pre-recorded session, or in Teams if you're using things like the gallery view or the spotlight view. The next thing is to be consistent, to find a structure that works for you. For us, the I do, we do, you do structure works well, and as I've said, Maddie uses the traffic lights, but keep that structure consistent. The other one is to make sure there's a context, always provide children with the key information or knowledge that they need to be able to access the reading material. To provide concrete examples, use visual support, whether that be images or inserted videos, especially when children are engaging with new vocabulary or new concepts.
Also controlled, give the children thinking time, pause the video, or even, I know that when I taught live lessons to start off with, it was very much, I just wanted to talk all the time, and that silence made me a bit panicky. Whereas in a classroom, I would stop and I'd give them thinking time. So it's making sure that they do have opportunities to stop and think as well, and so we can check for their understanding. Crafted, thinking about your questions relevant for the reading skills. So if you do think about teach individual content domains, do those questions link in with the individual content domain that you are teaching. So clarity, making sure that things are clear, the expectations given clearly before the session, but also after the session. And checking their understanding, and make yourself available for those who might need any additional support, whether that's through something like a help desk or whether it's through your, like I said, the AFL with the emojis, just checking to make sure that those children have a firm understanding, ready to complete their learning independently.
And finally, make sure you're celebrating the learning. Give feedback, whether that be oral feedback, whether it be through the use of emojis, and be specific as much as you can. If there's things that are done well, so again, Gabrish read back the text really wonderfully after Maddie had demonstrated effective prosody, and just commented on what he'd done well. Challenge, so providing children with challenge, thinking about any extension work or challenge that you can give them. Find ways to collaborate, that they're working together to build upon each other's thinking. And being creative, thinking about not only a variety of ways of presenting information, but actually a variety of ways of responding to a text, which can be orally, can be written responses, or through some of the visual learning tools that I shared earlier. And I think that brings us to the end. So just to say a huge thank you for listening to what Maddie and I have been sharing. I hope you've got some great ideas that you can take back into your own schools, into your own classrooms, and that you can use with your children. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the chat bar. If we don't address them here, we'll try and address them when you're in the main conference hall.
Thank you very much.
So I think if there's nothing in the chat bar, you can all make your way back to the main conference hall. If you've not quite finished the evaluation, if you could please do that, it'd be great, because it's always useful to get a sense of what you've gained from the session. But if you have done that, you can head your way back to the main conference hall. Thank you.
Thank you.